Okay, we're at Point Pleasant Park and voici we have McNab Island. Right behind me is Black Rock. And it's called Black Rock
because it is black.
And if we span around this way, we can see the colours of autumn slowly coming to their fullness.
So behind me is McNab's Island, and the McNab's Island was started to be used by fishermen, English and French alike, in the early 1700s, late 1600s, early 1700s, progressed through having disagreements or wars and fights between First Nations. The First Nations communities were actually sent to the island for a time. They were sent there, they were sent off the mainland to be staying there on the point over on this end was called Indian Point because that's where they set up camp there. Otherwise, it was used mainly as farming land. Peter McNab owned the island in the 1800s and brought over sheep from Scotland and had the whole southern half of the island was sheep farm and his property. The northern part of the island was broken up into smaller properties and people had farmsteads and just cottages over there. There was also a lot of military action over on the island. There's 2 forts and 2 batteries that were used throughout the First and Second World War, but right up until the 90s they were monitoring ships coming into the harbour. The other thing that is going on McNab's Island is you can see out by the lighthouse there, that's called Hangman's Beach. That's a bit of a gruesome tale of the island. People used to get hung for abandoning the Navy. They would be tarred and feathered and hung out on that point as a warning for other naval officers not to do the same. The other thing that used to go on the island is there was huge picnics and parties, and there was actually at one point 2 fairgrounds on the island with a steam-powered merry-go-round, and people would go over on Sundays. This was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It was the time of big party picnics on Sundays. And there was actually one recorded picnic that drew 6,000 people there, and that was in the early 1800s. It's pretty impressive. I think that might have been like half the population of Halifax at the time. But it was quite the party destination. Then and about the last resident on the island was around the 50s, mid-50s, full-time resident anyway. And since then, it's transferred over into the provincial ownership, and there's still a part of it. Fort McNab is still federally owned, but otherwise it's a provincial park that people can visit at any time, and a lot of it has grown over since then, and there's foundations and ruins. There's a couple of houses left. The forts are still there. Otherwise, it's a really wonderful place to go and see some nature and go on some hikes. Where we're standing in a very good spot to demonstrate the aftermath of a hurricane. So Hurricane Juan came through this area of Nova Scotia and hit Halifax. Probably one of the hardest hit spots was here in Point Pleasant Park, down near the waterfront of Halifax. That came through in 2003 in the fall, and took down an awful lot of the pine trees that would have been here. You can see some of the leftover dead stands back in the background here, and they've left some of the dead trees on the ground to regenerate. But this is also a really great example of pioneer species behind me. There's lots of blackberries and raspberries and gray birch and maple, and right now it's making a really nice colorful display because blackberries are kind of purple. Maples are kind of yellow and orange, but now it's just growing back. This is 2015, so 12 years later, and this is what we have. So just before Hurricane Juan, there was a spruce budworm infestation. It's still a bit of a problem, but it seems that Hurricane Juan actually helped to be the remedy for that situation, because it took down a lot of the trees that were infested by the spruce budworm. But essentially it was a bug that was coming up in higher numbers. It was kind of spreading across the country and was introduced here just before 2003. And during that time, the park was taking measures, I guess. They were cutting down infected trees or infested trees and burning them in an incinerator in the middle of the park, just to make sure that they could try to get rid of the bug, the spruce budworm. But then, yeah, Hurricane Juan happened and took down the rest of them anyway, and it seems like it's been okay ever since. This is Canada's maple. A sugar maple! They aren't very common here in Halifax, but they're all over Cape Breton.